Hey guys, check out this interview I just did with Mark Grover from Stemma. I think you'll really enjoy it. The basic idea is that everybody has a ton of data that they want to leverage. To do that, they've got to have appropriate data discovery and the right metadata to do something with it downstream. And everyone talks about making the lives of data engineers easier, but who's really doing that? Mark's going to talk a little bit about that. He's going to talk about drawing on his experience as a software developer and as a PDM for Amundsen, which is the Lyft open source discovery and metadata engine. Stemma is based on Amundsen, and so he's expanded that using this sense of empathy for data engineers. Mark is a co-founder of the Sequoia-backed startup, and so he'll talk a little bit about their design pattern that's focused on the self-service data culture. He'll talk a little bit about using queries to understand what data people are actually using versus what they tell you they're using, and he'll talk about his latest release. So I hope you enjoy it, and thanks for joining Software Engineering Daily. Welcome, Mark Grover. It's great to see you.
Great to see you. Thanks for having me.
So I wanted to, I've met you before and talked with you a little bit, but for our audience, you want to give just a quick bio?
Sure. I'm a co-founder and CEO of Stemma, which is a data catalog. Prior to that, I was a product manager working in the data team at Lyft and helped Lyft scale its data use within the company and comply with regulations. And prior to that, I was an engineer working mostly in the data space, helping anywhere from companies that were in the fintech space to working at Cloudera, building distributed software like Spark. We will dig into many of these things today, so I'll just stop there for now.
That's right. That's right. We first met with our deep interest in the data management space, which wasn't as front and center when we first started talking. And data management, when I think about it, it's scanning for sensitive data. It's the protecting the data, high quality, flagging it for some downstream use case, right? It's all of these activities so that individuals can trust it and use it. So that writ large, that's the thing that we're mostly concerned with when we started talking about this area. But I thought I'd like to just kind of back up and get your opinion. As more and more large organizations move to the cloud, why is this hard?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I want to pile on what you just said and build on it. So if you were to take data management, it falls in three broad categories, in my opinion. The first one is know your data. And I'm an analyst. I want to do analysis of sales that happened last week. I don't know where to start. But more often, this problem is more acute when you have sort of these citizen analysts, right? I'm a product manager and I want to see how my product is being used and I don't know where to start, right? Or I'm an engineer, so on and so forth. And then there's also sort of compliance aspects to this that also go in the same category, know your data, which is like, where does it flow from? Where does it flow to? And these can be used for regulatory needs, different needs in different sectors. So that's like one category. The second category is understand the sensitivity of your data. And so that's like, here's my PII, here's where all the sensitive data is, and that can be classified based on what's in the data or the importance of that data to the organization, whether that's business critical or open for everybody in the company, so on and so forth. And the third one is data quality. So I have some data and I want to be able to make sure that it meets some checks and balances on an ongoing basis. So like this column plus this column should always add up to that column, or this column should never be null, yada, 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 right? In general, this is difficult. And so all of these three problems together, to me, become data management. This is difficult because organizations have a ton of data. By the way, they've had a ton of data for a while. And I think this difficulty has increased exponentially over the last few years. And I think that's actually more cultural. Organizations have gone from being centralized organizations around production and consumption of data to being decentralized organizations around production and consumption of data. And that, I think, has been the changing point that has made this set of problems exponentially harder to solve than they were before. It's not, it's often talked about as the volume of data. I think that obviously contributes. I do not think that's the the main thing that's contributing to the complexity today.
No, that's interesting. So you're making the analogy of the culture, right, of having so many distributed, democratized sources and consumers of data within an organization, but it's also mirrored in the architectures of cloud data, where you have distributed data existing and persisting everywhere, and maybe also changing in a lot of different places. So I always think of it like a string of Christmas lights versus like stars in the sky, right? You used to be able to have this straight through process that you could sort of see, but now you've just got a whole lot going on in every direction. And so I think it has become really difficult for, those who, you mentioned data stewards and data communities to meet. Oh, am I? No. Sorry. So it makes, just makes it hard for these data communities to do the right thing. Where do you think, when you think about like who in the organization, who are the personas who play in, when you think about those three pillars, who are the personas who have the most impact on finding, trusting, and then getting value out of this data?
Yeah. The first persona that comes to mind around finding trusting data are these analyst data user persona. We call them analysts. By the way, you don't have to have a title analyst to be a part of this persona. A product manager, a salesperson, a customer success rep can put these hats on in order to find data for their account or their prospect or their product, right? And this persona suffers from two things. One is that there is a deluge of data available to them, and even though they may have the skills to get to that data, which is primarily SQL, they do not know where to start, what's trustworthy, so on and so forth. And that's the sort of primary opportunity and problem for them. It's pretty acute. I think the second persona we should talk about is the persona of a data engineer and analytics engineer. This person is responsible for producing data models, data sets, tables, call them whatever you may, that get used by the organization. And data analysts are consumers of them, but they are also like in a very interesting and tight spot. Why? Because they are downstream of product engineers, which have incentives to ship code as quickly as possible to move the business forward. And data for them is an exhaust, right? Which gets used for important things in the company, but mostly for analytics. And so what they find themselves is like really trying to stand at the back of this exhaust and trying to capture whatever is coming. And the things that are coming can change overnight, often without any heads up to them, right? So there's that spot. And then you've got your analysts who are like, hey, I don't know where to start. How come you aren't building the data models that are canonical data models for the company? Why is it that I cannot find what the user definition for a user is at my company? And like, where do I go find that definition in a consistent format that has all the attributes of the user I need, right? And then that coupled with ad hoc questions, the changes that are coming in, just like managing the inflow and the requests from users to use the data is you are right at the center of that combinatorial explosion, and without very great tools to help you.
And so that's part of the reason that you started Stemma. Can you tell us a little bit about what Stemma is trying to solve?
Yeah. So Stemma is right in that know your data of that base, the three-layered pyramid at the base of it. I think I can probably better answer that question by maybe sharing a little more about the origin story of Stemma, if I may, and then get to it. Yeah. So I started my career doing data for as an engineer, and I was building essentially data pipelines for a Forex broker in Canada. And that time Hadoop was becoming a big thing, and they were doing marketing attribution on a standalone relational database that was buckling. And so they got me to help them move their ETL pipelines to Hadoop, but also port their attribution algorithms on Hive, which was a SQL engine on Hadoop. I'm dating myself now. Um, and I did that work. And from there, I was like, oh, I actually don't want to just do pipeline work and sort of help just one organization. I want to help more organization. That almost always pushes you to a platform role. So I took on a platform role, which meant that I was an engineer at Cloudera working on open source projects like Hive, Spark, and BigTop for about 5 years. And I helped sort of large organizations, like one of the ones you used to work at in the past, to manage the scale of data. And after that, I transitioned to being a product manager and moved to Lyft to help again on one organization get the most out of their data. The story of Stemma actually starts around the time when I was at Lyft. And the problem at Lyft was that there was a lot of data in the organization, a lot of appetite to make data-driven decisions as a culture, but the same problem we were talking about around understanding, trusting, finding data by these citizen analysts, that was just a huge bottleneck. And I wasn't hired to solve that problem. I was just one of the first data product managers at the company. And I started talking to people, and this was the most common problem that came up. I'll pause here because I want to hear what you had to say.
I want to pause you a little bit there, and I want to hear the rest of your story, but it's so interesting you mentioned that, because I've worked for these really large financial, big organizations who always wring their hands that the young startups have it all figured out and that they're leveraging their data with real precision. And so what I'm hearing is doesn't matter how established or new you are, everybody's kind of struggling with this massive amount of data.
Absolutely. The struggles may be different. Like larger organizations have more fragmentation and more siloed data. And so that leads to similar problem, but solutions actually may be slightly different, or how you think about them may actually involve more pieces of solving the puzzle than just like one part of the problem that you're trying to solve. While a newer organization may have less silos, but just have like data that's not as useful. It just like leads to craft and maybe different values of data within the same system.
So I interrupted you though. You get to Lyft and you're talking to people who have this problem.
Yeah, and so I work on solving this problem, and I create an internal product at Lyft. The name of that product is Amundsen. The type of that product is data catalog. These names and types of products don't matter. The problem it's solving is like I have a desire to use data to find some insight, and I don't know where to start. And so like help me get started very quickly to get me to the trusted data sources that I should be using in order to do this analysis, right? Amundsen was super successful at Lyft. And we can put the link to the show notes here. Amundsen had 750 users every single week. For context, the people who had titled data analysts were less than 200 or so, right? So it lowered the barrier to entry for people, and 3x more people could use more data every week compared to the past. Till this date, it remains the single most loved, highest CSAT scoring product internally at Lyft, right? Amundsen was then open sourced, and a bunch of companies, Brex, Asana, ING, pick up to solve the same problem. Following that, I found two things. One was that there was only a very small subset of companies that were willing to spend the time and energy to take an open source project and make it successful within the organization. And I think that's maybe the obvious thing. The non-obvious thing for me was I think the catalogs were focused too much on the analyst persona and not enough on the persona that produced the data, that data engineer persona or analytics engineer persona today. And the issue of this was that data engineers remained dealing with those acute problems, which we alluded to slightly at the beginning of this conversations. But they were also, that led them to have the metadata, like the documentation or sort of additional metadata around what source of truth, to not be up to date that was in the catalog. So
Mm-hmm.
what you had to do is you have another group of users you can help solve problems. And as a side effect, what you get is more up-to-date metadata in your repository of information around what is trustworthy. And that was a core thesis of when we started Stemma. Like, we're going to solve the analyst problem. Like, no questions about that. But we felt very strongly, and I continue to this day, that you have to solve the problems for data engineers as well, because that is the only way you can consistently and over a long time maintain a really successful, powerful data catalog within the organization.
Interesting. I agree. I think the data engineer, upstream data producer, is still deserves more love than they're getting. Let's take a turn and just talk a little bit at an architectural level, if you can kind of step us through it. For Amundsen, like, some people may not know what it does. So can you kind of walk us through the diagram? I'd love to just walk through the left to right diagram of this is Amundsen and what it did, and then here's how Stemma kind of fits over that and it extends that. If you could help us understand that just functionally.
Yeah, totally. So let's start with left to right on Amundsen, and then we will go left to right on Stemma. Left to right on Amundsen is that it takes your information schema metadata from a data warehouse, and it pulls that in to create a listing of all the tables that you may have in your warehouse. I'm oversimplifying here. And then it takes the query logs off the data warehouse, and it does very light parsing on how often a table is used and builds a ranking on most used tables are listed higher up in the search ranking, and less used tables are listed lower down. And it populates sometimes additional metadata, like how often a table is updated, depending on the integration.
Mm-hmm,
And it stores all this in a relation in a graph database. Amundsen used Neo4j, and it has a search index on it, which is Elasticsearch based search index, which then both of these together power a UI. And that UI is a React-based user experience that users interact with in order to find, search, and understand data. That's Amundsen.
So it looks at these structured data sources,
Correct.
And it'll tell you a pointer to the location.
Yep.
It kind of ranks it by query interest.
Yep.
I'm sure that's an oversimplification, and adds a little bit of extra enhanced metadata so that people searching on the other end, on the front end, then get a little extra boost of like, what's the most important data and why do I care about it, is, then easily accessible. And it's easy to say, like, the focus is on the popularity, right? So people, it's not what people tell you they're using the most, but what people actually use the most. Okay.
Totally. Yeah. So now, as we go to talk to Stemma, actually, we should talk about capabilities of the product first, and then I can talk about the architecture. Perfect. Because the architecture supports the capabilities that you need, right? So problems with Amundsen were a fewfold. Like, one is that it focused on automation, but you realize soon that there is often a person who sometimes knows information that should fine-tune the ranking or change the ranking in their head. So an example, I'm using users table V1. By the way, the data engineer working on users just launched users table V2, and that starting today, you shouldn't be using users table V1, right? And I should provide a construct for this engineer to be the human in the loop and say, like, hey, even though the past usage says go users V1, actually only use users V2 going forward, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's just one example. There are countless examples of getting human in the loop in order to continue delivering the value to the data analyst persona. And that requires this human in the loop is often the data engineer, and providing, like, I can't ask them to update metadata. What I have to do is I have to provide value to them so they So they actually update the metadata as they're deriving value from it, right? So you're like, okay, what can I do for the data engineer? So it's like, oh, when they're planning the project to create users v2, I'm going to go and provide them information on who the hell is using users v1, right? And so they're like, oh, it's not being used at all, or oh, it's being used by this ML model that feeds the production application, or oh, these are the 3 people that query it the most, like let me go talk to them, right? And when I'm done, like maybe I integrate with GitHub pipeline and trigger a change in a status on the catalog as to what the source of truth is when the pipeline is deployed, and that changes the ranking, all this other stuff, right? So that pushed us first and foremost in Stemma to build a product for the data engineers. Now, what kind of product do data engineers care? They care a lot about operational products, right? Who's using my data? How much does it cost? I want to debug an issue that's happening with this data. Where does it come from? And so that's the sort of main, what is the history? When was this column added? That was the main driver for architectural changes in Stemma. So the product features that got evolved in Stemma were a really robust lineage parsing and lineage graph, a really robust usage analytics around who's using my data, and then using the lineage to power use cases. So it's like, okay, I'm going to use lineage to tell you who's using your data. I'm going to use the lineage to trickle down descriptions that you may have added on one particular column, like 5 levels upstream, all the way through to all the columns that it applies to. And so those were the product sort of changes that we made architecturally. That meant that we changed our main repository of metadata from a graph database to a relational database. And the reason was we wanted to preserve change history. When a particular metadata field was added, when was a particular column added or removed, and graph database was a really bad choice for that. So we moved away from Neo4j to that. There's like a whole user experience change around how users interact with the graph that didn't even exist in Amundsen. So like that is that is like another change around the experience of engaging with the graph and building use cases on top of that. So I would say those are the two
big
main
differences.
Changes. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about lineage. So yeah, it makes sense to do lineage on a more structured data warehouse. And I also, I like that you're focused on the user experience. One of the things I like about your thesis is my experience has been that the data engineer for one downstream app might be the consumer of someone else's data engineering upstream from them. And as you're right, they're not all the same level of experience or knowledge. And so having a user experience that supports many different profiles, I think makes sense, because some days you're a data producer and other days you're a data consumer, or maybe on the same day, right? It's not black and white. So back to lineage, how do you I do want to talk a little bit about that because it's a special feature of your offering. A lot of talk about lineage these days and a lot of different definitions of lineage. What do you think it is or is not?
That's an excellent question. Lineage is relationships, right? And there's two kinds of relationships in data. There's the parent-children relationship, and then there's siblings relationship. So parent-children is like, okay, I was produced from this particular source. Yeah, provenance. Sibling relationships are, I often get joined with this. There's the foreign keys between these two things. I'm going to actually focus. I think the parent-child relationships are much more interesting. So I'm going to focus on those, and I'm going to take the sibling one out. So when I talk about relationships, actually, like off data is actually a super broad term as well. And so relationships can be between data sets. So there are tables or columns that come from one another. They could across systems. So you can have this particular table comes from this particular ETL tool, which comes from this particular service. And that particular table is being used by that particular BI tool in that particular chart, right? So we've gone cross systems. And lastly, it can be task-based. So you take data, and you can say like, hey, this particular ETL job runs these 3 different tasks. One like creates the data, the second one tests it in the staging thing, and then the third one promotes it. That's like 3 stages of the ETL job. That ETL job then triggers 3 other ETL jobs that do something or the other, which may produce data sets, may make emails or whatever. So you can have a whole lot of task level lineage and go between tables and tasks and link them together. This whole mind meld is like technology, it's complexity. But the interesting things are like, what are you, okay, all right, so it's complex to get all this kind of lineage. And I think a lot of us in technology get excited about, okay, I'm going to do the most overwhelmingly filled lineage graph and power use cases on it, right? I think the reality is populating lineage graphs is a lot easier today than it was in the past, thanks to technology and infrastructure improvement. But I think we lose sight of what are you going to use this lineage for? Because you don't have to have a full lineage graph in order to serve use cases. You need to identify the use cases and then find what portion of the graph do you need to fill in order to serve that use case, right? And I don't think in the industry today we talk enough about what those use cases are, and we like beat our chests about like I have the most full lineage graph, right? And like I don't buy that.
I like that. It's like the olden days, everyone wanted everything real time. And in the product, we were like, is it how real? For the expense, why do you want it to be real time? The same thing with lineage. I think a lot of people are encapsulating transforms inside of lineage as well. And that's just incredibly difficult. And the question is, what would you use that for exactly? But it actually has a nice interweaving with your, it might make sense if you have a high usage, high priority data set, which, you have a special insight into in your product, so you kind of turn the knob up on how much lineage do you need under what circumstances. So I really like that approach. One of the things that we haven't had a chance to touch on, I'm just trying to organize my thoughts here. So there's a lot of players in this space right now. When I started in this, there were not that many, not many organizations. A lot of people had to build their own, all right, as they adopted cloud data. And so I think now organizations are saying, okay, there's now enough maturity in the market. Who buys Stemma? And how should they think about it compared to other offerings in the market?
Yeah. The single biggest competitor we have is doing nothing. Over 70% of the organizations do not have a data catalog, right? And I think while there may be a lot of competitors that people may consider like data catalogs, the single biggest I think that just represents the opportunity and the impact we can have in the organizations. But listen, I can't serve every single customer, every kind of customer today, right? So I'll tell you like what are the kinds of use cases that drive people to Stemma, and what makes them ideal or not ideal. They fall in a few different categories. The first category is you are a large organization that has a ton of data that you are trying to build a decentralized, democratized culture on, and you have the people, but you don't have the context around the data. And so these generally happen to be public organizations. I won't give specific examples of our customers that fall in what categories, but names of our customers are listed on stemma.ai so people can read them for themselves. And so generally this requires like actually a multi-pronged effort. It requires like an organization's acceptance that we want to democratize data. It requires an organization to break down access silos. And then it requires a product like Stemma in order to enable this full transformation, right?
It almost sounds like the buyer in the enterprise who's concerned with personas, with enablement. There's democratization of data, but There's kind of 2 ways to get to that. You can be like a tech software person like me, where it's like, oh, just put the platform in place and people will figure it
Yeah.
out. Or more like you, what you're saying is, let's think about the use cases and the engineers and the people who have to get that context and
Yeah.
use it. That seems like that would be the crew that would be, oh yeah, it would see Stemma and really understand it.
Totally. The second kind of buyer is one that's going through an organization with a lot of data change. An example would be people migrating from one data warehouse to another. An example could be the data that's in the data warehouse itself changes quite often. So it's like, oh, I'm moving from one marketing tool to another. I'm moving from one CRM system to another. The more change and entropy you have in your data, regardless of the size of the company, the product becomes more invaluable to you. And given our whole premise around enabling data engineers in understanding the impact of their changes, and this becomes crucial, right? And so oftentimes you find fast-growing organizations using it, or just like product-led SaaS companies that have a lot of sort of evolution happening in the company that use it. So if you are a company where like a column from your production service was populated every day and overnight it changed to being nulls, like that you fall in this category, right? And the third category of organizations are companies that are creating a culture of citizen analysts, right? You don't have enough analysts in the team to create insights for the rest of the organization. So what you need to do is like, we all need to bring our shovels and mine, right? And that is what companies like Grafana and many others in Stemma customer base, some I can't name, fall in the category for, where they're trying to sort of enable non-data in the title people to do analysis in the company.
I'm curious. One of the interesting things about this problem space is, in order for someone, many new companies are offering the best solutions.
Yeah.
But you're asking established and even highly regulated firms to give you all their data or have you look at everything, right? What have been some successful implementation paths where you've been able to provide value? I guess, how would you get started with this? If I'm an implementer, I don't want to turn over everything. What has worked for you guys?
Yeah. So a few things, right? In order to get value from the catalog, you actually don't need to get catalog. You need to get the breadth usually, but not the depth. And so you don't need data to be shared. You only need the metadata to be shared. So it's like, what are all my assets, tables, columns, and dashboards? And what are the queries being run on these assets? And yeah, sometimes you put PII information like, oh, select star from credit card data where credit card number is equal to that. That generally isn't the case. Most organizations are pretty sensitive about where they put credit card data because of regulations like PCI. And so generally, I think the barrier to providing data in order to get value from the catalog is not as high as it may come across the first time we chat, right?
Okay.
I think the interesting parts are like, if you're a large organization, you have probably like different groups of people who use data, and I think you want to start with just one group and exposing them data in their group to see if this is working out for them. But in a smaller organization, you were pretty like there's just one, the entire company is one group, and time to value becomes a thing. I actually worry. I see less from people about like access to data and more about like, okay, so you scrape all the metadata, all the query logs. Is that enough, or do I need to do anything else before I start getting value from it? And the reality is, I think anybody who says that, now there are two use cases, right? There's the use case of data discovery, which is I'm understanding data, what's trustworthy. There's a use case around data lineage, impact analysis, and operations, right? Operations, you can get started on day one because you only operate on data that's like ground truth source of information about when things change, right? Discovery, we find that often there is curated tribal knowledge in your head that needs to get out and correct and inform the catalog out of what it may use automation for to inform itself, right? And so I think anybody who tells you that like on day one you can start using the catalog for data discovery is lying. Right. And what I spend a lot of my energy and where Stemma spends a lot of its time is like, how do I lower the amount of energy and time that's spent in getting your catalog to value? Right. And that to me is the holy grail. That to me, and that, for example, the things that we have done, one of our customers, when they were onboarding, they were like, oh, here's a list of like, they were like, okay, our warehouse has like, I don't know, thousands and thousands of tables, right? Which ones am I going to go do some amount of curation, certification, deprecation, maybe write a description for the table, so on and so forth. And they're like, they had this idea that they were going to do a ranked list, descending order of the number of queries on their tables, and they were only going to do the top 10%. And that worked out really great for them. So what do? We build in our product a descending ranked usage of tables. And now every onboarding that happens, we slap that list, be like, all right, in order to get to value, like these are the things that we need to just double check. And once you have entered documentation or double check that it's certified or deprecated, then we are good. Another thing we do is we want to get as much bang as possible for every single amount of curated effort you do. So that means if you added one description somewhere, I want to apply it to every single place where that description applies to, right? I want to, if you
Stemma flow that through that description.
Yeah, okay. Exactly. Right. Same thing, whether that's a tag, and all that. And then the other thing that's
a question is that also for like language that's specific to an organization. Sometimes people talk about certain types of data in their own way.
Yeah. So for that, what we recommend is that you tag like a users table, maybe called a passengers table at Lyft. I'm making a hypothetical example here, right? Like, and so like tagging that particular table as passenger, even though it's called user, will make sure that when searching is done or descriptions are entered, that it comes together. Yeah.
Okay.
The last part, I had one more thought. I had one more thought here.
I totally interrupted you. Sorry.
Oh no! Hey, this is. I love the organic conversation, so I'm sure it'll come back to me.
Well, actually, we were just talking a little bit about time to value. And that's a core theme of your recent release. Congratulations. Doing a major release is no joke.
No, thank you. We're like a SaaS product, and we release every day, multiple times a day. And often we get together after like things have piled on enough and we've gotten customer feedback. All right, we're like, okay, this looks like a bundle to talk about publicly, even though this existed in portions.
I appreciate it because I come from that era of software, big bang deliverables, and I understand a release that has like a name.
Totally. Yeah. And it's gotten me some getting used to. But yeah.
What are the focuses of the latest bundle?
Yeah. So we were chatting about providing products for data engineers to engage. And so one huge investment we've done here is enabling a data engineer to be able to see who's using their data. And that's both ETL jobs as well as like people who ad hoc query the data. And we built like an experience in the lineage graph, which allows you to, any organization will have a really complex lineage graph. And so we built an experience that allows them to engage with it, in which I think in the most meaningful way I've seen. And by the way, I think we aren't even there yet. I think we have a long way to go to make lineage information like comprehensible. But I think like there's so much focus on me filling my graph that nobody is like, how do I actually use this graph, right? And by the way, part of this graph will never be used in a UX way. It should always be used by machines, right? Like, okay, hey, you are about to delete this table in like the GitHub PR is saying, did you know there's like 3 dashboards that are being run from it with these many views on it, right? So this release lays the foundation for us to start with the graph model. And hit the use cases with the graph, and has an API which allows organizations to interact and engage with the lineage models in their products. And powering use cases on top of this graph. Some of these use cases are in the product, like the impact analysis messaging workflow, which is like, I want to tell specific people who have used this table in the last 30 days that this table is getting deprecated. No longer am I sending a blast to everybody on Slack, but it's a very targeted message to the people who have actually used it, right? And I'm saying, do not use it starting this date, right? So these are examples of use cases that we have built. And the second is like our investment in further lowering time to value, which with our additional lineage capabilities allows us to auto describe columns and trickle down existing descriptions down there. In one customer, we saw over 10,000 descriptions being automatically populated just overnight because of a product like this.
And that's, let me just plus one how important that really is, because throughout my career in the last 10 years, I've seen so many of these massive undertakings to sit everyone at their desk, everyone to tag and write about, what's the schema, what's in this. And it's such a duplication of effort. It's often not accurate, and people really don't like to do it. So it's just exciting to me when you hear that you can take the good work of one person who knows the data and flow it through, so that the people who are the data analysts, whether that's their title or not, that's a phrase I've learned from you in the last hour, they can spend time doing analysis instead of like prep and tagging. So I think that's a really thoughtful feature. You've also extended your support and integration with DBT. Is that right?
That's correct, yeah. So we integrate now with DBT Cloud. That means if you're a DBT Cloud user, all of this functionality comes pretty straight out of the box for you. And sort of provides the same rich experience out of the box.
Interesting. So I want to switch gears a little bit as we come to the end here. I want to ask a little bit about Stemma and a little bit about how you're doing. How's Stemma doing as a business? It sounds like things are going well.
Yeah, we have great customers that I'm lucky and fortunate enough to work with every day. Some of our customers include SoFi, Grafana, iRobot, Convoy. Many of these organizations, I believe, are at the forefront of using data in their respective domains. And they challenge us to be better every day. And that's as a product, as people, and as a startup founder, that's what I care. Like, where I am today is doesn't actually matter all that much. How I learn, how quickly I learn, and do I have the right feedback loops to learn is the thing that matters, right? I'm lucky to be in a great place right now, but like that's the thing we optimize for, and I've just been really
it makes me think like velocity is the product in so many ways now, especially for a complicated offering in data. You've got to have your design partner, your customer in there kind of building out with you as things are just moving too fast. So that's exciting to hear. You have had an interesting, just switching to you as a founder, I just want to hear a little bit about your personal journey. We often have listeners who are technical product managers, or they are data engineers thinking about when will I be an early employee, or when will I found my company. Share with us a little bit about what it's like to come from an open, you had a real open source mindset. You spent so much time open sourcing at Amundsen, and that's not trivial. And then moving into being an entrepreneur and a founder on your own, like what was that process like for you?
I have a few thoughts that I'll try to summarize very quickly. One is that just because I am an open source founder doesn't mean you should be one. I think you have to find your shtick, right? And my shtick's this path, but like if you try to copy my path, like it's unless like you have similar skills and abilities to me, like may not be the right path for you. Likely isn't, right? And so understanding your shtick is important. And I know I have been in a place where I didn't know what my shtick was. And that's okay too. That means that it will come to you, right? And the only thing I'll say is that continue working on things that bring joy to you and excite you. Because at least for me, that has been like that to me is the leading signal of like what I will become really, really good at, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if something keeps drawing you, even though it doesn't seem like related to your current job or related to like what you're doing, that's okay. Like, and don't approach it necessarily from like, oh, this is going to be my stick, which will then lead to a company. Like, approach it just like, this is fun and I'm going to do it, and good things will come out of that.
Just stick with like genuine interest. What haven't you liked? What have you experienced as a founder that you're like, oh, this isn't great?
There's a lot of stuff that is around operations, right? And so that goes anywhere from fundraising to managing expenses. Like, there's yeah, and I think like if you're a product person, like, yeah, of course you're not gonna want to spend your time like nailing down how the money is being spent and making sure that we aren't spending extra money on SaaS tools.
Like the top salesman for your company,
yeah,
and you don't get to scratch your product itch.
Yeah. And there have been things, by the way, that I liked as a founder, which were surprising to me. As a founder, you are out there selling and like you're spending, like, there are two kinds of founders and they can exist in the organization. Like, you're spending energy building product and like sort of innovation in the company internally, and then you are like externally sort of bridging the gap between like understanding what the buyers are looking for, the users are looking for. And I don't think these are like sort of exclusive, but you play these two roles every day, right? And I've thoroughly enjoyed like talking to folks that are like dealing with problems in their own domain and understanding what the hell is going on in their lives, right? I just had one conversation yesterday with a company that's in the streaming space yesterday, and they're not a Stemma customer. And we were just like learning about each other, how we see the world. And sometimes Stemma is the right solution for help them solve the problem. Sometimes it's not. But I think that exposure that I've gotten and the ability for me to like understand, communicate, help, whether that's through Stemma or outside with a variety of different products, has been immensely gratifying, right? Yeah, I'm grateful to be in that spot.
Well, that's amazing. You've had quite a journey. Building a product and getting funded is not trivial, and having your first customers. So it sounds like things are going great. We'd love to check in with you a little further down the road and understand certainly about your integrations with the DBT are super interesting as well. I'd like to hear more about that the next time we connect. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today. It was great talking with you.
Likewise, Jocelyn. Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure speaking with you.